On the pod today, we have the Deputy Whip for the Senate Democrats. Welcome back, Senator Brian Schatz. How's it going?
It's going fine. Nice to see you both.
Tommy walked into the office today. He is wearing a button-down shirt, which I haven't seen him in over a year, and it was because he thought you were going to be here in the office. He thought you had a layover in L.A. on your way home to Hawaii, and now he's all dressed up for no good reason.
My wife asked me if I was going to court, and I said, no, we have a big interview. And then everyone made fun of me.
That's fancy for you. That's great.
Yeah. This is as fancy as it gets.
Senator, there was a lot of elastic waists over the last year and a half, so we're climbing back.
That shirt is like very casual for 90% of my colleagues.
Well, I'm wearing shorts. All right, so I saw that you spoke to NBC News the other day about the prospects of passing Joe Biden's economic plans and said that you haven't been this optimistic in many, many months. What's gotten into you? Why are you so optimistic?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. It's a mood, right? It's it's the sense that if Joe Biden's for it, if Chuck Schumer's for it, if Nancy Pelosi's for it, there is pretty good unity in the Democratic conference that we're going to move forward on the American Jobs Plan. We're also procedurally kind of in a good spot. We have plans to move on the so-called bipartisan infrastructure package, and then followed by the budget resolution, which sort of unlocks reconciliation, which we can do in September. So we're like in pretty good shape procedurally, but I think it really more is an intuitive sense that there's a recognition we've got to do this. There's a sense of urgency. There's a sense of meeting the moment. And that doesn't mean that this bill won't face numerous near-death experiences along the way, because it's a big bill and that's what happens, and people threaten to kill it all the time, and Axios will report trouble for the bill, every 72 hours. We're in a good spot, and I'm feeling pretty optimistic.
One of the big parts of the bill is obviously going to be like climate, Joe Biden's entire climate agenda, or most of the climate agendas in this bill. You chaired I think it was some fancy committee on climate a while back. I think it was like the special committee on climate. And I remember you telling Vox about a year ago that you thought that when it came to climate and agreeing on climate policy, all the Senate Democrats are united and ready to roll. Do you still feel like that's the case, looking at what's going to be in the reconciliation bill around climate?
3 points. First, Vox, not Fox, right?
I said Vox, yeah. Did I say Fox?
I just couldn't hear it.
I know you were on Tucker Show a year ago.
I don't remember a climate interview with Fox. First of all, I think that my experience in Hawaii, when we were starting the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative in 1999, there were lots of kind of stupid arguments in retrospect between people who cared about wind, or people who cared about solar, or people who cared about conservation. And what we realized is that the best policy pathway and the best political pathway are to enact all of the various measures to address the climate, because the size of the problem and the size of the opportunity is so massive that we really have to throw everything we've got at it. And that sort of unlocks a political universe where we don't really have to fight with each other over very much. So we're the top line number that was authorized, or not authorized, that has been contemplated, of 3.5 trillion provides enough room for us to do not just meaningful stuff on climate, but the kind of climate action that will meet the moment, understanding that it's super rare for us to have the trifecta. But look, we're a diverse caucus, and people are going to have hives about various pieces of the bill, and we got to work that out. So I don't want to underestimate the challenge in front of us, but I think there's a recognition that the Democratic caucus has to deliver on climate, and not for some sort of obscure political reason because it's going to win us the midterms, but because the planet is on fire, and everybody gets that, and the collective determination is giving me a ton of hope.
Well, I'm glad you talked about the scale of the problem and the hives, because you work in an institution that is in part designed to tell the country, the House of Representatives, to like slow its roll a little bit, right? I mean, the cliche, the very modern metaphor you always hear is that the Senate is the cooling saucer, but we live on a rapidly warming planet with a bunch of people that move at Twitter speed, and that can create some friction, right, between lawmakers and people like you who are trying to work the process as fast as you can, and then activists like us who sit around and tweet, which is obviously much more important. So what is your message to people like me and John who
Stop tweeting.
Thank you. Do you find our tweets annoying?
You first.
Shame, John.
we've come to an impasse. What's your message to activists who are, filled with existential climate dread and, want to figure out a way to sort of push lawmakers to meet the moment, move faster, et cetera? Like, what do they need to know?
So first of all, don't despair. And the reason that I say don't despair is not sort of just to be reassuring, but we have to remind ourselves that our opponents thrive on our despairing. They want us to feel despondent. They want us to feel like it can't be done. And so momentum begets momentum in the political context. And so we should turn our righteous outrage into action. But those actions should be equal to the moment, which is to say, it is not about finding some line in the sand and like whipping Democratic members about whether they're for a specific provision in the climate bill. Because the danger there is what I would call like the Keystone thing, which was an important fight, and I was opposed to the Keystone pipeline, but in the end, that became like the measure of whether or not we were making progress on climate or not. And look, Keystone's dead and the climate is still a huge challenge. So you can use individual provisions in this bill as a rallying point, but don't underestimate the importance of a package of provisions that actually add up to 1.5 degrees centigrade. So the point being, we're not negotiating with each other. We're not even negotiating with Republicans. It's physics that we're contending with. And so, not to get, too wonky here, but my test, I get asked almost daily, well, what is the one thing you need in the bill? Is it your carbon fee bill? Is it a clean electricity standard? Is it electrification of transportation? First of all, I say it's all of it. But second of all, the rather maybe unsatisfying answer for someone who wants a pithy quote is, the truth is I'm going to take all of these things and I'm going to send them to Columbia University, Resources for the Future, MIT, and the federal government, and they have like modeling shops, literally, who do these statistical models, and they'll take all the provisions from any proposal, and within 3 or 4 days, they'll spit out, okay, that'll get you X number of degrees of warming. Mm-hmm. That's my test.
Okay.
I don't care. I mean, I don't want to say I don't care, but my primary concern is not satisfying any individual constituency. My primary concern is satisfying my daughter, who's 13, who's saying, you better do something on climate. You're going to fly back and forth 50 times a year. That's the reason you're in the United States Senate. And that's how we have to look at this, which is a Citizens Youth Climate Corps is great. My, bike lane, electric bike provision is great. I love my a carbon fee bill. I love the environmental justice provisions, but it all has to add up to actually us solving it rather than just having something to rally around.
I've never seen road rage like Jon Favreau with a biker out of a bike lane in Washington, D.C. It's incredible.
It was a D.C. thing. In L.A., you don't see as many bikers.
No.
It was
well,
tough. They were all over the road. They acted like they were drivers. Yeah. Anyway, that's another issue for me. I support biking.
Are you anti-bike, John?
Don't tweet at me about biking. I support biking. I have a bike now. I drove. Yeah, I got it for my birthday last year when there was nowhere to go in the pandemic.
Are you like just theoretically for biking as public policy, but you're actually a jerk to bikers?
No. Well, now everyone's going to think I am. I used to be. I've gotten better.
Are you a bimby, or what is a biking? What is it? I don't know. Go ahead.
You said the word despair, and the image in my head was the houseboat that Joe Manchin lives on. Mm-hmm. What do you know about what he's willing to support in terms of climate policy, just based on, I don't want you to try to like divulge conversations you've had with him recently, but like just based on his past conversations, past issues that he's been on either side of. Like he said this week that he has some concerns at the language. He said you cannot be moving towards eliminating fossil fuels. That doesn't seem great. But like, I know you've obviously talked to him for a while. What do you think he's willing to support?
Well, I mean, we've had multiple conversations, and like you said, I wouldn't divulge at least his side of the conversation. But let me give you, my perspective. When I was point person in Hawaii on the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative, right? Like the business community is sitting there going, wait a second, we have the Pacific Command and we have Waikiki and we need, firm, reliable power. And I said, yeah, of course we do. We're just going to move the percentage of our portfolio up as aggressively as possible. And in the meantime, we're going to be lighting LSFO, low sulfur fuel oil, on fire to create electrons. That's a stupid thing to do. but I'm not a maniac. I don't want to stop that instantaneously and have nobody be able to turn their lights on. And so the sort of gap between someone like me and someone like Joe Manchin, as a practical matter, is not as wide as it appears, because all he's saying is, hey, for at least some number of years, we're still going to be lighting things on fire to create electrons. And what he is hearing is that basically all of these things will be instantaneously banned. And I think even the most aggressive climate activists understand that we're still going to need to put gasoline in our cars. And until we site and permit and construct and plug into the grid all of this renewable energy, we're not going to take away electricity from people. And so I think there's a fair amount of room to move here. I don't want to overstate my optimism as it relates to conversations I've had with Joe, but I would just say that he's moved a lot. And I think he understands that those of us who have serious plans as it relates to clean energy understand that both politically and morally, we can't de-electrify the United States of America, right? The idea is to put more and more things on the electric grid and then put more of that electric grid on renewable energy resources as aggressively as practicable. But the idea is not to turn our society into 150 years ago where nothing works anymore. And I do think that the utility companies of old and the oil companies of old really put the fear of God in a lot of people, that's actually where we wanted to land. And if we had our druthers, that we would instantaneously just literally ban all fossil fuel generation and transmission and distribution. And look, I think we should get rid of it as quickly as we can, but as quickly as we can is a matter of siting and permitting and then getting it onto the grid, which is going to be decades.
Congress passed into law a child tax credit that some experts say will cut child poverty in half. I believe those checks are going out to families this week. My question is, do you regret not incorporating some sort of epic Trump burn in the bill text so that it would get covered? Maybe something about Ivanka versus Jared, just sort of get it in Politico.
I think your point, Tommy, is that we're crappy at capturing the imagination of the Beltway press.
No.
And
they're crappy at not picking up what you're putting down.
Well, fair enough. But
I think it's a little more about them reporting on what's exciting versus what's important would be really more the core of my critique.
Or what's new, right? Even the excellent reporters have a bias towards newness that drives me up a damn wall. But I will tell you that this thing is so popular and so helpful to millions and millions of families that it's not about capturing a news cycle. It's about being relentless about the child tax credit. So many families are going to get so much help from the federal government for the foreseeable future because of something that we did that people didn't even know we were doing it when it happened. So we've got to, in the American Jobs Plan, we've got to extend this. And then frankly, we've got to run on it. We got to make sure that everybody understands what we've done.
Yeah, no, I asked that in jest because it's such a big deal. It's so monumental. It's so important. And there's the opportunity to extend it forever and just fundamentally change the way the United States government supports families in this country. And then John and Dan were talking about some focus groups on Thursday where Trump voters said, wow, if Joe Biden could do that, he already had done it. That would make me really reconsider who I voted for in the next election. So it's politically popular, as you said.
Have you talked to the White House about your idea of calling it Biden bucks?
Oh, yeah.
I have, and they're sort of we'll take, we're the messaging people over here. We'll take that under advisement.
What about shots in arms, SCHATZ in arms?
Biden bucks in pockets.
Shots in arms, Biden bucks in pockets.
I like it.
We can work out something here.
Okay. Anything that gives me credit for something I didn't do,
Again, I won't ask you to divulge details, but have you had any recent conversations with your colleagues that have made you optimistic on passing federal voting rights legislation?
Not particularly.
Yeah, bummer.
And so I think there's kind of two ways to look at this. First of all, I want to go back to the thing I said about despair. This one in particular, the language has gotten so apocalyptic, and for very understandable reasons, because the threat is very real, that it does run the risk of having the impact that Trump did on his voters in Georgia.
Yeah,
That if
I've been
people
worried about
feel
that.
like they cannot win because the system is actually rigged structurally, then they will not turn out. So we've got to keep two sort of things in tension in our own minds and coming out of our own mouths. One is that this is creeping authoritarianism, and it is the offspring of the big lie, right? And that you can draw a straight line from the big lie to January 6th to all this voter suppression. And so we have to have that sense of urgency about passing legislation at the state and the federal level. We have to have a sense of urgency about Attorney General Garland and his deputies, who are extraordinary, doing everything they can to enforce the law and the Constitution. And I'm not suggesting that this is not as bad as it seems. I am saying, however, that if we build up to the point where the only solution is to yell at my colleagues who have basically promised not to break the filibuster, and just assume that if you're a senator from Arizona, you're a senator from West Virginia, that you can be pressured into flipping on this, I think that's just like tactically not smart, right? Because I take them at their word. They don't want to break the filibuster. Now, are there ways to modify the filibuster to make it work better? Sure. Should we keep the pressure up? Absolutely. But again, authoritarian regimes, and Tommy, you know this better than I do, but I've been studying a ton about this. They really do thrive on this sense of the inevitability of them winning, right? Of a minority of people ruling the majority of people, and the majority of people feeling absolutely powerless. Yeah. And so, yes, we should fight for the statutory and constitutional provisions that protect the sacred right to vote. But no matter what happens with the filibuster, with the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, with HR 1, we have to keep fighting, because everybody, I was thinking about this, all of our predecessors, whether it was, in the 60s and 70s, or whether it was the Civil War, or whether it was World War II, they've faced these existential threats. And I very much doubt that the leaders of the movements that prevailed said, oh, we are well and truly fucked, right? And there's so much of that stuff on Twitter of people who sort of present themselves as leaders of a movement. And what a thing to say, right? What a thing to say. If we don't do this, it's over, right? And it's never over. And so I don't want to present to you good news that I don't have on voting rights in the legislative context, but I just want to say, don't despair, because hope is a decision, hope is a muscle, and we've got to keep exercising it. Even if we're not even sure what the pathway is forward, we know for sure that if we say, oh, we are well and truly fucked, and it's October of an odd numbered year, then we are well and truly fucked.
To channel.
I really wish that I hadn't sworn so much on your pod.
We can bleep it.
Yeah, no, that'll be more fun. Yeah,
it'll sound cool if we bleep it.
To channel the activists, what they would say, I think, is like, okay, we'll be there and we'll fight if we know that this is lost in the end, right? Like, we'll still be there, but we want to see every Democrat, from Joe Biden to every Democratic senator, trying everything and fighting as hard as possible. So, you see this story yesterday that Manchin meets with the Texas Democrats. They come out of the meeting. It seems a little hopeful. They say, all right, we believe that Joe Manchin wants to protect voting rights. He wants to do a much narrower bill, put it on the floor, get everyone there. And then they ask him about the filibuster. He's like, I don't want to talk about the filibuster. Forget about the filibuster. But could you see a scenario where you get sort of a pared down bill, a spare bill, you put it on the floor, and then you're trying some of those, forget getting rid of the filibuster, because I'm with you. Manchin and Sinema have said it a million times. I think we should take them at their word. But you try some of these filibuster reforms. You try to say, all right, 41 Republican senators have to be on the floor the entire time. Or maybe there's a carve-out for voting rights legislation. What do you think about the likelihood of some of those reforms being tried over the next couple of months?
I think the likelihood of them being tried is pretty high, and I think we should. There's nothing that, for instance, Kirsten said that prevents the filibuster rules from being changed, right? Because there's lots of like arcane details, like, you guys know this stuff, but like, we need 60 votes just to proceed to a bill, not to vote for it, but just to get on it. And the motion to proceed used to be like the equivalent of like at the end of every Senate day, it's like, hey, we're going to convene at 10 a.m. and these committees are going to meet and blah, blah, blah. And technically you could require a roll call vote for every single one of those, like basically ministerial little things that we do. It's called a wrap-up script every night. And it's like, here's what's going to happen tomorrow. Technically, any member could be like, I object, we're going to vote on all this stuff. The committees can't meet till noon. Like, the Senate rules as they exist are completely untenable. And the only way we function on a day-to-day basis is every night we get a unanimous consent, which means everybody doesn't object. And then we have like all this functional stuff. Foreign Relations Committee is going to meet at 10 and blah, 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 right? And so the motion to proceed, for instance, used to be never voted on. We just got onto a bill, and then some jerk, actually, I don't know if it was a jerk because I don't know who it was in history.
I mean, odds are, yeah.
Fair enough. Demanded that we vote on that. And so now just to proceed to a bill requires 60 votes.
Ugh.
There are a bunch of reforms that could improve the process and still allow Joe and Kirsten and others to stand on, I didn't eliminate the filibuster. In fact, I saved the filibuster by making it work better.
Right. Speaking of untenable, is it weird to work in a building with people who just don't seem to care that the Capitol was stormed by a fascist mob?
It's super weird.
I mean, I just like your tweets on this of like, if we can't come together to create a bipartisan commission to study this horrific event in our history, that I think is the best argument against the filibuster. I found that very compelling.
It's hard. I mean, it's hard that just as a human, like I think anyone who's in the Senate and can't compartmentalize, just at the human level and can't like deal with someone with whom you disagree pretty strongly or even dislike pretty strongly, then you're probably not going to be very effective in the Senate, because the deal is you kind of have to just be able to handle this kind of level of combat and situational partnerships, because otherwise you're just going to sit there in a corner and only work with the people with whom you agree, which are never going to add up to even 50, but let alone 60. And so, yeah, you got to compartmentalize, but compartmentalizing to the extent that you're trying to work with someone who ignores that the Capitol was under siege. And to me, the physical siege of the Capitol was a manifestation of an even bigger problem, which was they tried to overturn democracy. Yeah. And so, sorry for going off on a bit of a tangent, but I think this is kind of important. What I worry about more than a siege on the Capitol again is a nonviolent siege on democracy itself, an overturning of the Electoral College vote without a shot being fired, without a thug, breaking through a window, because I think it's almost a certainty that the Capitol will be extremely safe the next time there's an electoral count, right? And so the crime against the country was manifested as a physical siege on the Capitol. But what I worry about is now we're going to say, okay, we're going to have a barrier around the Capitol. We're going to have better security protocols. And it's like, okay, well, that's great. But what happens if the Congress just comes in and flips the goddamn presidential vote because they've all been overtaken by Donald Trump's, base? And so I think we have to worry about both things, right? The physical security of the Capitol, but also the Electoral Count Act and the extent to which there were some individual, I don't even call them brave, but there were some individual election administrators who did the right thing. I don't think it's that brave to like abide by the results of an election. I don't think we should count that as an act of courage, but there were individual decisions that were the right ones throughout the country on both sides of the aisle. And I think we just have to, one thing I direct your listeners' attention to is secretaries of state and county clerks, to the extent that they're elected. There's some bananas people running for that with Trump's endorsement.
Yeah, they're bad.
Almost explicitly desiring to overturn the election next time. So I worry about all that.
Can I ask you a little inside baseball question here, which is about the Senate Parliamentarian? The last time we cared about the Senate Parliamentarian was when this individual was removing a minimum wage increase from the COVID relief bill. Now there's talk that the big infrastructure bill that you guys are working on could include language that could create a pathway to citizenship for certain undocumented groups, like the Dreamers, farm workers living in the U.S., potentially essential workers who are from the pandemic. So that would be a monumental step forward on immigration reform. But it seems like, once again, this massive bill, this massive decision rests in the hands of the parliamentarian. So I guess two-part question. How is that the process, one? And two, what do you think the hope is here that these immigration provisions could stay in the bill?
Let me take the first one, the last one first. I'm reasonably hopeful about it. But as it relates to the parliamentarian, I guess I would just say that we ought to be careful not to make this like her fault. This is our
no.
In the Senate that we have devolved or delegated our authority over lawmaking to an unelected person who's interpreting the law or our own internal rules best we can. It is within our authority to overrule the parliamentarian who is not an elected official. She's trying her best. She's on the level. It's our fault, right? And so, of course, I want everything possible to fit through this reconciliation aperture, right? But if it doesn't, I think we should overrule her because these rules are a creature of us. And it's about, rules in service of the institution rather than an institution in service of its own rules.
Do you think that the clean energy standard could pass through the parliamentarian will sign off on that? And if not, are there alternative plans for including some kind of carbon pricing in the climate provisions for reconciliation?
I really don't want to predict what the parliamentarian is going to do. It's highly technical,
right?
And you get professional staff who spend 6 hours with her making the case. And so who knows how all that's going to go. But I would just say that I believe a carbon fee still has to be on the table. And the bill that Senator Whitehouse and I and Martin Heinrich and Kirsten Gillibrand and others have introduced is a progressive carbon fee. And I think that one of the things that's happened over the last couple of years is I spent a ton of time with environmental justice leaders who had real reservations about a carbon fee, but frankly, a lot of the reservations were based on a sort of Exxon-sponsored organization that wants a carbon fee so they can just kind of move on from this. And they wanted every single dollar of revenue to be remitted. They want it to be revenue neutral, which means all the money gets remitted back to the ratepayer and the taxpayer. And our model is totally different. Our model generates revenue for environmental justice, for members of labor unions who are going to be dislocated, whether or not we pass a carbon fee. Coal is not going to last for another several decades. So our carbon fee is progressive, and we spent a lot of time listening, but also explaining that not every carbon fee is sort of written by corporations. Ours is written with them in mind.
Senator, I saw in preparing for this interview today that you were the Hawaii state spokesman for the Obama campaign in 2008. I was the Iowa campaign spokesman. John was a speechwriter.
Pretty much the same job. Yeah.
Well, now you're a U.S. senator, and we read underwear ads for a living. Is there a lesson there about life choices, in your opinion?
Well, I just want to say someone who was running against me had a pretty good burn about, I was the Obama for Hawaii guy, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you led the committee to make sure the sun comes up tomorrow morning." So it was not the most difficult campaign. It was a lot of fun, and we did a lot of organizing. But our challenge was, oh my God, we got too many volunteers. We're running out of ballots. We got to go to Pinko.
Though. You got 70%, right? You mopped up.
We did great. But I can't say it was because of me. I do remember a buddy of mine calling and saying, "Did I just vote for president on a Post-it note?" I said, "I'm pretty sure you did."
So good.
I didn't know this about you, that you were until Tommy brought it up this morning that you were the Obama spokesperson back then. That's amazing.
We called Chicago to try to get some resources, some merch, whatever. And they told us to live off the land.
That's such a Pluff line.
I could hear Pluff say that.
Oh my God. The other thing that we love is that you and Senator Chris Murphy, the Murph Dog, the Murphster, you guys have this special fundraising thing going on Twitter. Do other senators get mad when you only QT him? How does that go over in the cloakroom?
It's fine. It's fine. Everything's fine.
Is anyone trying to get into your clique? Is it?
I see Cory Booker.
He's thirsty. Michael Bennett seems a little thirsty.
Yeah, Bennett. Yep.
Cory Booker is not that on Twitter anymore. I think he's just decided it was not a good use of his time.
Now I feel
In
bad.
fact, I gotta send him tweets and say, hey, look, I tweeted at you, because it's not
It's a sad message.
capital V very online.
Well, but like, you know, we joke about this because we're obnoxious people, but like, you know, we can talk to you and you can talk about MIT models on climate change, and then I look at your Twitter feed, and when the Gulf of Mexico was on fire, you tweeted, but can we afford climate action? But you did it in the SpongeBob SquarePants alternating caps font, and I think it is what makes you different. I mean, there's this generational difference in terms of how you communicate and how you fundraise that I think our senators look at what you're doing and think, oh, maybe I wouldn't have to run to some lobbying shop on K Street to raise money if I was a little more savvy with some of this online fundraising that they're doing.
Well, I don't know about the fundraising piece, but I do think more and more members are running their own Twitter, and it's getting more interesting, because sort of one of the things that I've said, and Corey in particular has said to the whole caucus, is if you're prepared to talk to somebody, while you're walking onto the Senate floor on the fly, then you should be prepared to do your own tweets, right?
That's
because
very good. Yeah.
I think the fear, right, is that you're going to tweet something that you didn't mean to say, but it's that you've got more control over what you write and then press send than like how you respond to like someone from roll call sticking a microphone in your mouth on your way to the Senate floor off of a red-eye flight. And so there's a bunch of members who are getting a little more comfortable in the medium, and then a bunch of communication staffers who are getting gray hair.
So nervous.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Obama probably wouldn't have tweeted.
Oh, but no, Obama's probably would have been that his tweets would have been like, he's like, look, here's my 140 characters, and now I need a 25-part thread.
That would have gotten him into
So
trouble.
it would have been a link to a Medium post, right?
Look what I have said, link to Medium post, 11-minute read.
Remember when he like dropped off a blog on your desk for the Daily Coast
Yeah, he wrote,
about
like,
John
3,500
Roberts'
words.
confirmation? It was like he wanted to be a Daily Coast blogger back in 2006.
Hey, I got a question for you about your president. Is he online with like lurker accounts?
I don't know.
I think so. Well, so he was online to play Words with Friends.
Mm-hmm.
That was a thing, a real security potential violation threat issue there. I bet he has
Wouldn't he just smash at Words with Friends? Wouldn't he just kill everybody?
He would just crush Reggie.
Yeah, I think they just played with him to make him feel good. I think that when
Pete Souza.
he had his iPad and he could read the news on his iPad, he wasn't like on Twitter, at least back when I was in the White
I'm
House.
talking about now. Like,
That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
I think he is like informed in a way that you'd be like, well, how did you know that if you haven't been scrolling around? But I could also, he does like, he goes to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal. He reads like the top read, most shared stories. He kind of gets it that way. I'm sure he's at the Atlantic, right? All the very Barack Obama type places that he gets his news from.
He's also disciplined enough to go on Twitter for 11 seconds, realize it's low-calorie garbage, and walk away. Unlike us, we're all.
Yeah, that's what I would imagine. He's like, I give it 12 minutes a day, and I scan and see if there's anything I need to know, and then I move on to more long-form stuff. Where it's like, I keep scrolling and going like, I should probably read something that's longer than a tweet. Oh, but what about this thing? Oh, but what about this thing? And so it's only on the airplane that I can do the long-form stuff.
Yeah, no, I'm the worst because I give my wife grief if she's on TikTok too much. And then I'm like, you're on Twitter all day long, and it's just a chat room for nerds.
It's really bad when you're even reading like a story in the Post or the Times, and you're like checking Twitter in the middle of reading the story. That's when I'm like, all right, my attention span is now nothing, and this is just garbage what I'm doing to myself.
Yeah. Can I ask another dumb question? Is the congressional gym nice? Why do members, Love and I were talking about this the other day, there's so many gyms you could go to in Washington, D.C. Why does everybody end up back at the House and Senate gym?
So I don't know about the House gym. I heard it's fancy. My good friend and the former governor, Neil Abercrombie, was the chairman of the subcommittee on the gym.
Come on. That's a thing?
And he told me that, it made him very popular with members, and he was the first person to make sure that the women's and the men's side were equally resourced, which was a big deal. I don't exercise indoors for the most part, so I don't go to the Senate gym. I've been inside of it. It's small and lovely. That's all I can tell you.
Well, on that note,
Yeah.
I think we should wrap it up.
I don't know. The first time I see Steve King naked, I'm out of there. See ya.
Now I know anyone who runs for Congress, your highest aspiration should be to chair the subcommittee for the gym.
That's pretty sweet.
That's
Yeah,
where it's
big
at.
shoes to fill.
Senator Schatz, thank you so much for coming by as always. Next time you're in town on a layover in LA, please come by the office so that Tommy can dress up for a reason.
I'll dress down, I guess.
I will do. We'll figure out what we're all wearing and match it all up.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect.
That's nice.
All right. Thanks,
Take care.
guys.
Thanks.